George Soros has done something that I wish more business leaders would do. He has participated in the conversation of his time. Born in Budapest in 1930, moved to England in 1947, went to the London School of Economics, which had a real influence of him, one of his mentors there. Came to the United States, made lots of money, but he has also been what I call a public intellectual. He has written books, he has written op-eds, he has taken an interest not only in affairs of business, but affairs of state. He has talked about globalization. His first book in 1987, The Alchemy of Finance. Then in 1990, Opening the Soviet System, he talked about Russia. He continues to talk about Russia and consider it in a variety of ways. Underwriting Democracy in 1991, Soros on Soros, Staying Ahead of the Curve in 95. In 1998, he wrote The Crisis in Global Capitalism, Open Society Endangered, in which he talked about capitalism that he saw failing. And now he has come back with Open Society Reforming Global Capitalism, in which he speaks to some of the arguments he made and some of the mistakes he may have made in the first book. He is someone who has had an impact on his time, and I am pleased to talk to him this evening about business, about globalization, about finance, about politics, and about the way the world works and how he sees the future. Please welcome George Soros. Well. It's good to see you. Let me, the NASDAQ today, I'm starting with stocks. The NASDAQ today hit a 2-year low. You made a famous interview in Chile, I think it was, in which you talked about the American economy coming to a kind of hard and rocky recession. Landing, I think, is the expression we use. Right. How do you see it today?
That's the way I see it. I don't think one should be too disturbed because we are not going into a depression. We might not even be in a very severe recession at all. But there is now we are in a bear market, and the bear market has an effect in itself on the economy. So it's a self-reinforcing process. So there are things depressing the economy, but there are also forces at work that are going to keep it buoyant, because we are going into the recession with really ample monetary and fiscal tools to fight the recession.
Yeah. Are you yourself, in terms of the role that you have played as a trader, as an investor, with Quantum Fund and other vehicles, still active in the buying and selling of equities and debt?
Well, I'm not directly active. I haven't really been on the line for the last 10 years. I was running the fund more or less single-handedly in the first 15, 20 years. Then I built up a team, and I managed to sort of get out of this rather strenuous business of running a hedge fund. But I am actually a little bit more on the line today than I was a year ago, because the key people who had been working for me left.
All right.
So
now here's my question. Having read this book, you alone will appreciate this more than anyone else. Open Society, Reforming Global Capitalism, where you respond to some of the things that you have said before. Why should we believe you? Why should we, based on what you have done in terms of acknowledging your mistakes, do you feel more fallible now in terms of your judgment?
No, I've always been fallible. And actually...
Have you always felt fallible?
And I always acted fallible. Yeah. And actually, if I have a bit of an edge, it's because I know what I don't know. Yeah. Now, I did make a mistake in stepping out and predicting a serious calamity. I was carried away by forces that I could see building up. And that was a mistake. I don't normally do that. However, I always, as an investor or speculator, I always, not always, but usually I take a position. In other words, I make a bet. But I know that the bet I've made may be the wrong one. So I'm constantly on the lookout for the mistake I've made. Now, it happened to come through in print here, yes. But it comes through in real life all the time.
But are you sorry you made it? I mean, are you sorry you wrote this book at all? Do you regret writing it?
No, I don't regret writing it. I do regret
what you put in it.
Well, that particular, let's say, I got carried away. And you know, I've got egg on my face, and you know. As I say, it's not an unusual position for me to be in.
And is there a philosophy here, not only about living, but about investing, in that if you're going to make a bet, you ought to make a serious bet, and you ought to understand, most of all, the mistakes you have made before in order to be smart about the position you take?
Yeah, I think that there's a very serious, actually, philosophical point behind it, because my entire view of the world is built on the recognition that as participants, we can't act on the basis of knowledge, because knowledge requires that you need to be apart from what you are making a statement about. The statement is on the one side, the facts are on the other side. And if the statement corresponds to the facts, it's true. And if it doesn't, it's false. And that is how we can actually determine whether, you know, truth and knowledge. This is how you can gain knowledge. But when you are a participant, what you are making statements about or deciding about is not apart from your decision. Your decision is part of what you are referring to. And it's not something given about which you can establish this correspondence. So financial markets, they are not discounting the future. They are actually creating the future, because the decisions that the market participants make actually shape the future course of affairs. Yeah. So actually economics, financial economics, which pretends that it can determine or define the equilibrium, is doing something that's impossible to do. So it cannot qualify as science in the same way as, for instance, natural sciences can. In other words, it cannot make unconditional predictions, because the predictions it makes
influence the future.
Right. So this is actually the key point, one of the key points in the book, that the concept of equilibrium, when applied to financial markets, is actually not a very helpful concept, because you can never attain equilibrium, and you can't even constantly be moving towards equilibrium. Half the time the market moves towards equilibrium, the other half it moves away from it.
Yes.
So, and
it will always sort itself out?
Well, if left to its own devices, actually financial markets would collapse. So, so they are not stable. Yeah. They are not stable. And we have learned it.
But that goes against, I mean, that's an important point to make an interruption. It is, that goes against the grain of what some laissez-faire economists believe, which is that the market will always find its own.
This is actually one of the main points I'm trying to make in the book, that we have a false conception of how financial markets operate.
And the false conception is that?
That left to their own devices, they'll move towards equilibrium.
You also believe it's necessary, and this is outlined in this book too, for government to have a significant role in a regulatory way.
Right, but
because markets can't be left to themselves.
Because markets left to their own devices would actually occasionally collapse. And we have learned that because we've had a number of crises in the course of history. And every time you had a financial crisis, you then realize what's wrong and you put in some regulatory mechanism to prevent a recurrence of that crisis. Therefore, you had a different kind of crisis. And that's how the actually central banking and the Securities and Exchange Commission and the whole regulatory environment has developed. Now, we have very good institutions now, and we have not had a collapse since the 1930s. However, markets have now become globalized, right. And we don't have the global institutions adequate for global markets.
And in fact, you're even arguing for a world central bank.
Well, that's right. It would be desirable to have one, but it's a little bit utopian in the present situation.
But I understand that, but I mean, what's interesting too about what you argue now is that most of the recommendations for reform are piecemeal and insignificant.
The ones that I make?
No, the ones that are being made.
No, but actually, I feel that...
The same thing about yours too?
I feel that, I sort of point towards the kind of reforms we need, but I don't feel that I've really done it. I would have done it if I knew how. But
well, you haven't done it because you didn't know how, you haven't done it because you don't know the answer, and so you're just giving us the best that you have, knowing it's incomplete.
It's incomplete and inadequate. And it's something that I will continue to work on, and I hope that it's not something that I can do alone, of course. Yeah. I hope that there will be a recognition, a general recognition, that we have to develop our institutions. We have to strengthen our international financial institutions. Actually, currently, under the influence of what I consider a false ideology, the effort is to dismantle or downsize the institutions we have.
You mean IMF? You mean
the
World
IMF,
Bank?
World Bank, the International Consultative...
Now, is that because of financial considerations or because of the protest of people that were at Seattle and Washington and Prague and other places?
Well, no, this is actually from the market fundamentalist point of view. Right. This is, let's say, if you read there's a report, a Meltzer Commission, which, let's say, designs an architecture based on the idea that you better leave markets alone, and don't interfere with markets. And the reason we have crises is because there are institutions interfering with the market. So that's the market fundamentalist point of view, which I'm attacking in the book. Now, you also have an attack from the Seattle protesters, and there is this very strange coalition from the far left and the far right. Working to destroy the global capitalist system as it currently exists. It actually reminds me, because I'm reading a biography of Hitler. It's there are 2 volumes, 800 pages each, and it reminds me of the Weimar Republic, where you had communists on the one side, far left and far right, and the institutions were too weak to withstand the conflict between these two forces. Right. So in a way, you have this attack from both sides of the system as it currently functions. Now, I think it is actually a very beneficial, or potentially a very beneficial system. So I'm not opposed to capitalism at all, but I would like to reform it to make it viable so that it could actually, we could preserve and build on what we have already gained.
What's the best reform it needs in your judgment?
Well, I think that you need to, let's say, do more in the way of providing incentives to countries that follow good policies, particularly countries at the periphery of the system, to do better. So you have at the moment, the way the system works now, you have a disparity between the center, where the financial markets are, where all the capital from all over the world, all the savings are sucked up to the center. And then they are supposed to be pumped out to the periphery by the financial markets. Now, since the markets don't operate the way they are supposed to, but they do need to be managed, the management is actually at the center. It's the Federal Reserve and the US Treasury that basically sets the policy for the world. And if we are in trouble, they will take the appropriate measures to prevent a collapse. But when the countries at the periphery get into trouble, they don't get the same treatment. Yeah. So there is a disparity between the position of the periphery countries and the center.
Let me take a look at just recent history, financial history, starting with Mexico. Mexico would not have survived without an interruption in the market because the pesos was going down, down, down. Would have collapsed. Yes?
Right. Well, Mexico is pretty important to us, our neighbor, etc. So we bailed out Mexico. But in effect, it's the Mexican taxpayers that paid the bill. So we provided them...
Because they had to pay the loan back.
They paid the loan back, but then they had a collapsed banking system, and let's say they lost 20% of their GNP, which they have to pay off over a period of time.
And how is the Mexican economy doing today?
Doing a lot better.
Growing at about 4 to 6%?
Yeah, it's doing very well now, but the damage was done, and it did considerable damage at that time, and they are still paying the bill today. So now they're improving, but the disruption occurred. The same thing in the Asian countries.
I was going to go to Asia next because it followed. Yeah. What happened there?
Well, they suffered a very severe recession. They moved out of it. Now things are getting, again, worse because they are left with the debris of the accumulated debt.
But not
they haven't been able to dig themselves out from
under. Are you only talking about Japan, or are you talking about China, South Korea, other places, or just Japan?
I'm talking about, let's say, Thailand, Korea, Indonesia, which is basically now a basket case. It's a country in very serious difficulties. And the
no
result,
leadership.
And the result is that the medicine that they had to swallow, the medicine meted out by the IMF, it was really very bitter. And
too stringent in your judgment because it limited any chance they had of recovery.
Well, the medicine was designed to enable these countries to meet their international obligations. In other words, to be able to repay their debt, which they are doing, and a lot of money has come out. But the pain that they have suffered is very severe, and there is a reaction. There is a great resentment, which actually I feel personally, because I'm seen as the embodiment of
capitalism,
of currency speculation and so on. So there's,
Is that primarily because of what happened with the Bank of England in 1992?
Yes,
that they view you as the arch villain because you were the guy they said who broke the Bank of England.
Right, and
did.
Well, that's true. Well,
how much do you think he made? $1 billion.
Well, I didn't do it, of course, on my own, and I couldn't have done it on my own.
You mean you had other speculators following your instinct?
No, they weren't following. I was following them. In other words, the market is an impersonal force, but I'm a face that can be identified. So I'm the face of the market, but I can't go against the market. If I wanted to, let's say, break the Bank of England, I would be broken. I would be wiped out because I wouldn't succeed. It's only if I can guess right which way the market is inclined to go, and I'm ahead of the curve. Then I can make money. If I happen to be wrong, the herd tramples on me, and I'm wiped out.
Clearly, that's why you were so successful, because of your ability to be ahead of the herd. In a personal way, do you feel today you're as good as you were?
No.
That you don't?
No, absolutely not. I'm like an overaged prima donna. I'm in retirement.
Yeah. Because what? You lost what?
Well,
courage?
No.
Instinct?
No.
The ability to. You know what you said? You know what you said? I no longer wanted to endure the pain of the tension.
Well, if you want to be, let's say, running a hedge fund, you have to be committed to it 100%. It's got to occupy your waking and your sleeping hours. Now, I have other interests. I'm very happy to have other interests. And if I have those other interests, I can't give the attention that it would take to actually run and make all the decisions.
At the level of hedge fund management that you were with, you can't, most of these people have other interests, don't they?
Not really.
This is a 24-hour day
it really
preoccupation.
It really is.
You got to get up at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning to find out what's going on in Japan and in Asia. And
right. And it's a very strange business, because if you're doing well, you can take your eye off the ball, and you can actually have other interests and enjoy life. But if things go bad, you can't ignore it, and you've got to give it your full attention to try to find out what is going wrong and correct it. So you have a kind of an inverse relationship between effort and result.
Okay. Then should I have, if I was watching from the side, and I watched you get involved in philanthropy, which you have some reservations about now, in Eastern Europe and in Russia and in other places, speaking to the idea of an open society, an idea I think that you learned back at the London School of Economics. If I had watched you and I should have said, he doesn't have his eye on the ball anymore. He's over there trying to create freedom in the former communist world, and so I'm going to take all of my money out of his fund if I had any in it, because old George is distracted.
Well, the only difference is that I knew...
Or young George is distracted, whichever.
No, I knew that I was interested in other things, and therefore I found other people to run my fund.
Okay, I realize that, and Stanley Druckenmiller did a great job, but here's the point. Aren't you a smarter, wiser person if you are more wiser about the world, and if you're involved in the world, and if you are doing things, and you have your pulse more on what's going on other than just the market? And doesn't that contribute to your capacity to be smart about the market?
Well,
or is the market too tough?
No, up to a point, yes. If you have somebody else who worries for you, then you can give him very good advice, and you can be very wise, and I actually, you can be a coach and so on.
And if it goes well, you can take the credit. If it goes badly, you can blame him.
Well, if you do that, you lose him. So that's the one thing I have never done.
Yes, that's fair. Yeah. But let me turn to philanthropy for a second, because then we'll come back to global markets and the transition you went from here to here and where you are today, although I think you've outlined that pretty clearly. Philanthropy. You've given away a lot of money. Have you been successful at philanthropy? Has it been wise? Do you think it makes a difference?
Yes, I think that I can honestly say that the foundations have made a difference. How much difference is hard. It's not really for me to say, but they really made a major impact at a critical time.
In what way?
Well,
Take any one specific or in a broad, general way.
I can take specific, but actually it's innumerable little things that add up to a big thing. Because open society is a society where people decide for themselves. You don't decide for them. They shape their society. Now, to help people do that, when you have a regime that is telling you exactly, let's say a party state that is trying to control all aspects of your existence, and then you get some support in doing your own thing, and this is what the foundation did. Anything that was not a state party initiative, the foundation supported. And so that support added up to opening up that society. So by offering people an alternative so they could do what they wanted to do, it undermined and broke open the system. Then later on, as the communist system collapsed, you then had to make the transition from a closed to an open society. And that is a very difficult transition to make.
Because they don't have the experience of doing that, nor the institutions.
Exactly right, exactly that. And so they do need a helping hand. In order to sort of, an open society is a more sophisticated, a more difficult form of organization. It's so sophisticated that you don't actually see it.
Yes.
A party state that you can really see, and they announce, what the dogma is and so on. Open society, it's just what people do. It's freedom. Yes. So to make the step up, you do need a helping hand. And that is what the foundations provided.
And what reservations do you have about your philanthropy there and its success or lack of success?
Well, you see, I've always been very skeptical about philanthropy because it goes against human nature. Because human nature is basically, our survival demands that we other people's interests. It sort of goes against the grain.
And what reservations do you have about your philanthropy there and its success or lack of success?
Well, you see, I've always been very skeptical about philanthropy because it goes against human nature. Because human nature is basically, our survival demands that we other people's interests. It sort of goes against the grain, and then it's full of pitfalls. Philanthropy is a sort of a hothouse of...
But does that mean that religion goes against the human nature then? Because religion is about compassion and is about looking after others' interests. It is about...
Well, you take any religion and you can see some flaws in it.
It's also about accountability.
Pardon?
It's also about accountability.
Well, if let's say selflessness, that is, let's say, demanded in Christianity. It's very, very hard actually to accomplish because if you act selflessly, you insist on being selfless. It may be a very selfish thing for you to do. I mean, there are all these contradictions in religion, similar to the contradictions that you have in philanthropy.
Let me talk about some ideas that have made news recently. You were one of a number of very wealthy people that signed a letter saying to the Congress or to the President, I can't remember who it was addressed to, saying don't abolish the estate tax, the inheritance tax.
Yes.
You, Bill Gates' father. Why?
Well, because I think it's a very regressive step. Because point, you do need to tax. And I think actually the estate tax is the best point at which to take a slice out of somebody's estate,
right.
because the person who has created the estate is not around, so you're not discouraging him from creating wealth, right? You're not taking away, anything away from him,
yeah.
And you want a society which is characterized by equality of opportunity,
yeah.
and to have the children of the rich, my children, have an advantage to start with.
Yeah.
Now, then to have a large amount of money as well, it would create a plutocracy as self-perpetuating elite, which is not based on merit, so it's really not a very desirable.
Just because they were able to maintain their fortune.
Right.
Here is the other argument some make. It is that because of an estate tax, a lot of very wealthy people give away a lot of money in order to avoid the estate tax.
Which is also true. Which is also true. Yeah. And I can say from personal experience that I give away whatever is allowed by law. In
order to avoid giving it to the government when you die.
Yeah, well, I think that I can
choose better than they can.
Use it better for philanthropic purposes than they do. And so I think that's the appropriate thing to do. But the fact that they contribute by giving me a tax cut, it does encourage me to do it.
What do you think of Putin?
Not much.
Not much. But not much because of his intentions, or not much because of his experience as a KGB agent, or what?
I think that he is as yet not a terribly well-formed personality. Is a functionary who has been put into that job, even though it is the top job.
By Boris Yeltsin.
By Boris Yeltsin or whoever was behind.
Right.
I think he has probably, I mean, I don't know him and I haven't met him, but he's basically reflecting the various forces which are at work in Russia today. They are conflicting forces, and so there's this constant struggle, political struggle going on for Putin's ear, so to speak, and who can prevail. So it's not he's not a personality like Hitler, for instance, who really stamped his mark on the world, and that's a good thing that he's not like Hitler.
Yeah, of course, in
many ways.
In many ways, yes. But I mean, my point is, let me come to Hitler, because I thought about that when you said you're reading it. I may be reading the same book, but what's your fascination with Hitler? I mean, what is it that you want to understand about him?
Well,
the depth of his depravity, or the or I'm just.
No,
how could he achieve so much power?
That's the latter. It's the latter, because he's
thugs.
Actually, I mean, there are innumerable Hitlers running around.
Yeah, would-be Hitlers.
Would-be Hitlers. Yeah. I mean, they're running around in our society and in every society. And he was basically a rather unsuccessful dreamer, fantasies, and somehow he could act out his fantasies, and they were rather evil fantasies.
And what's the answer to somehow? How was it that he was able to act out? Was it simply because he had an understanding of how to use terror?
Well, he learned a lot in that regard. But he had a fantasy, which was a fantasy of hatred. I mean, he really was deeply anti-Semitic, and he had a desire to destroy Jews, and that was a private fantasy that then became a public fantasy by linking in with the frustration and anger of the society in a period of economic crisis. So he was sort of carried on the wave of public sentiment. It's a that's why it's a fascinating.
And he created scapegoats of everybody, including
the
Versailles Treaty.
Right. Now he held forth, he lived in a Y, actually, in a men's home, and they had this, the political discussions, and he would spout forth his ideas. But there are many people like that in many men's homes.
Yeah.
Now, how does a man like that actually reach the ability to act out his fantasies?
And the answer.
And destroy kill millions, and
50 million in World War II.
Yeah. So it's a interesting.
That's why there've been so many books written about Hitler and Napoleon and Caesar.
Yeah. Well, there are different.
I understand, but they were people who had fantasies of conquering the world.
Yes.
In each case, right?
Yes.
And succeeded in different ways. There's an interesting book, 5 Days in May 1940, which shows how precarious it was in 1940 when Churchill came to power.
Right.
It's extraordinary how close they came.
Yeah, that's an interesting book.
I talked
7 Days.
Let me come back to you in terms of how you see the world. We talked about markets, and you believe that, as you have said, that markets are inherently unstable.
Right.
And that markets need new institutions to keep the peace and prevent recession and depression.
Right.
When you look at the world today, what's interesting that's going on in terms of China, for example, in terms of Latin America, in terms of Africa? What we think about primarily in terms of Africa now is the devastation of disease,
right?
Malaria and AIDS.
Yeah. Let me make it do it in a more general way. That you have global markets. The markets are global, international, but the political system remains based on sovereign states. Right. So you have a disparity between our political arrangements and our economic arrangements. That's sort of the general background of where we are.
But before you go on, explain to me the difference in the disparity in our political arrangements and our economic arrangements. Our economic arrangements are global and our political arrangements are not? That's simple?
That's right. Because there's a difference between markets and politics. Let's say in a democracy, it's the voters that count, right? In a market, it's money that counts. So you've got two different principles at work.
And sometimes they mix.
And sometimes they mix, and it's a very dangerous mixture. It taints democracy, right? And of course, you also have many political systems which are not democratic at all. So there is some sort of affinity between this market capitalism and democracy, in the sense that most countries at the center are currently democratic, and many at the periphery have recently turned more democratic. But there is no necessary, how should I say, identity between the two. So what we need to do is strengthen democracy, this open society, because it doesn't happen by itself. And the other very interesting thing is that actually the global political system is very much under the control of the United States. We are the dominant political power in the world. Now, that puts certain responsibilities on us. Because if we use this power solely for our own benefit, a system where the others don't benefit from it is basically not a stable system. And we are, being a democracy, the government basically wants the votes of the people here, doesn't want the votes of the people in China or Africa. So it is guided by our interests. And because of that, there is increasing resentment, which we can't understand, because we are basically very decent people, and we don't understand why people should not respect what we stand for. But actually, there is increasing resentment throughout the world about American dominance.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Felix Roden just wrote a piece, an op-ed piece in the Washington Post last week, which is the notion of sort of this sense that America is arrogant and not listening as it exercises its power. I mean, it's almost like the world views us, in contradictory ways. They want to know that America will do the right thing, yet at the same time, they want to know that they are being respected. I mean, I think this led...
So we are not actually living up to the responsibilities of our leadership position. And we are, it's not that we are isolationists, not at all, but we tend to be unilateral in our exercise of power, and are not very tolerant of divergent views. So I think we need to change our own attitude, and that would require strengthening international institutions, which are not totally under our domination.
Sure. I mean,
and that we are not...
You mean that, by that you mean the United Nations, the World Trade Organization?
Well, the World Trade Organization we are pretty well behind, because that is there to create and support free trade. And since we benefit from it.
And create a referee.
Right. So actually, while I'm a great admirer of the World Trade Organization, in the last 20 years, it has shifted a little bit too far in the direction of trade über alles. In other words, trade above all.
Right.
Let's say, protection of the environment or labor conditions or the provision of public goods has to be subordinated to free trade. And that, I think, is going too far in this market fundamentalist direction.
Let me talk a little bit about your personal life from a sense of, your parents escaped, they survived the war in Budapest.
Let me promote another book than the one that we are talking about. My father's...
This is go ahead.
My father's memoirs of the war year, 1944, will be published in May. It's already published in England. And I distributed it to my friends, actually. And I got, I must say, a much better, much more...
warmer
reception than for my own book. And
what did that teach you?
Well, actually, he describes something that was a formative experience in my life. In my life. I mean, the German occupation of Hungary, and living through it under false names, false identities.
He sent you to live with another family.
Right. Okay. And he arranged for all the family to, and actually he helped a lot of other people to find a way to live with false identities. And most of us survived. Some didn't, but most of us did. And that was a very formative experience.
In what way? What do you think it did? How was it formative?
Well, it taught me, I was 14 years old, and it taught me that sometimes the rules that are applied are intolerable. In other words, there are times, there are abnormal times when the normal rules don't apply. If you follow orders, you perish. Now that's quite an experience. I mean, in normal times, if you follow orders, you generally get by. Maybe you don't get ahead, but you should be relatively safe. Now,
maybe the more interesting thing you've said this evening.
But then, if you followed the orders, you would actually perish. So this was a very harsh lesson, and it was also a very strange experience for me, because it was actually probably the happiest year of my life, that year of German occupation. Because for a 14-year-old kid to have an adventure, first of all, I had a father who understood what's going on. We were confronted by unspeakable evil. It's like a David and Goliath fight, and you are on the side of the angels, and you actually prevail by surviving. So for me, it was a very positive experience. It's a strange thing, because you see incredible suffering around you, and in fact, you are in considerable danger yourself. But you're 14 years old, and you don't believe that it can actually touch you. You have a belief in yourself, your belief in your father. It's a very happy-making, exhilarating experience.
Did it make you feel like an outsider?
Well, certainly I was on the other side.
Yeah.
I mean, I mean, this is very much, I would say, you might call the Jewish experience of being on the other side, and so it's very much, I would say, a core of my identity. Was formed in that period.
So many things I could go. I mean, I wanted to talk about you and Julian Roberts and others, but I wanted to stay with the notion of politics. When you look at Israel today, are you optimistic? Are you pessimistic? Are you...
I'm distressed.
Distressed?
Yes. And I think many people in Israel must be distressed.
Because of the failure of the peace process?
Because of the failure of the peace process. And
where it may be heading now.
And where it is heading. And unless Sharon manages to play a Nixon in opening up with China, in other words, maybe he could actually have
only problem with that is Nixon had Mao, and you don't know who
the
is
trouble
going to
is
play that role.
You don't have a counterparty that you can deal with, and that's the problem. So it's not really in the cards, and therefore I think Israel is going to go through a very difficult period. I mean, it's very troubling.
But I mean, my sense is that you're more, and it's more than difficult. I mean, you worry about war. Do you worry about the survival of Israel?
In a funny way, I've not been very engaged in Israel.
Why not?
I think there are enough Jews to take care of Israel. So I thought that I'd just leave the other Jews, and so I'm a little bit distant.
You stayed in Eastern Europe and Asia and other places.
Yes, because I felt that there are fewer people ready to get engaged there.
Of all the people you mentioned, you don't know Putin, but I wouldn't put him in this category, and this will be my last question. Who have you wanted to meet? Who would you most like to know, dead or alive?
Well, actually, I rather liked the idea of Keynes, but
what?
Keynes, John Maynard.
Oh,
Keynes,
John Maynard Keynes, the economic philosopher.
But I read a very nice biography by Roy Harrod, and it really appealed to me. Of course, his homosexuality came out afterwards. Yeah. So I don't aspire to every aspect of his existence, but
But did you agree with his economic ideas, if not his sexual preference?
I'm very much influenced by them.
Yeah.
And I'd like to.
But his idea was that government investment was a positive contribution to the economy.
Well, he had actually a very good prescription for the situation that prevailed then, and had he, then of course. The Keynesian economics had its own limitations. Right. Had he stayed alive, he would have changed the prescription to meet the conditions. But
which is your theory?
I was very much influenced by him.
George Soros, I thank you very much for being here. And I thank the television audience at home for joining us here at the 92nd Street Y. This is a place where interesting conversation takes place routinely. Some of the most interesting people in the world come here to talk, whether it is a songwriter like Paul McCartney or a diplomat like Henry Kissinger or a financier like George Soros and a philanthropist. People come here to share their ideas to an engaged audience, and we who are part of this community appreciate the fact that this takes place at the 92nd Street Y. So to the audience across America, thank you very much. Let me say, The Open Society Reforming Global Capitalism is George Soros' book. Thank you for joining us at home, and good night.